The title of my talk today is Diversity and Caring for All. And I'm getting a lot of this talk from a chapter in The Heart is Noble by Gyalwang Karmapa. And it seems like it's an important topic, especially today, even though this talk was given, I think, around 2011, 10 years ago. So he is talking about his vision for where we want to go. And it's an important point that there's a difference between a plan and vision. That a plan tends to be fairly solid. This is the way we are going to do things to get to where we want to go. And vision is, this is where we want to go, but the actual way we're going to get there is uncertain, and we are going to work on that. And to clarify this even more is, as we work on accomplishing where the vision, we constantly come into contact with new situations because of impermanence and unpredictability and so forth. And so it's important to be flexible. If you have a plan, then when you run into difficulty, it is, well, if it's not working, then let's just do more of it until it does work. Whereas vision is, you're more mindful of how things are changing and are willing to be flexible and quickly go in a new direction. And in fact, when you do accomplish your vision, it's only then that you know how you are going to do it. So he is talking now about social action, specifically social action as a way of caring for others. And he starts out with this quote: if we create a social system that honors our basic interconnectedness, our society will be aligned with the reality of our existence. And so, of course, everybody wants to be happy. And happiness needs to be the most important product of a society. It's interesting that in Bhutan, they introduced a long time ago the concept of a gross national happiness to contrast with a gross national product, which is based on materialism and money and so forth. So when we're talking about gross national product, it tends to be that we're competing with each other. We're comparing with each other. We're looking at finances. We're looking at possessions. And there's very little room for love and caring to enter in there because it's way down the line. So there needs to be a shift. And of course, as always in Buddhism, the shift starts with us. A shift, if you would like, of consciousness. So when you are with another person, it's better to ask them how they are doing and listen to them to find out how they are doing, rather than you explaining to them how you feel. And so understanding others is very important. Understanding ourselves is very important, but having ourselves understood is not as important. What comes to mind is this conversation that I overheard, and I've said it before. I think many of you remember me saying this. It was at a restaurant at noon, and there were two work colleagues in the booth next to me. And since the back of my booth that I was sitting on was also the back of the booth next to me, I was very close to the one person that was talking, actually a lot closer than I cared to be. I really didn't want to hear the conversation, but one thing that the person said that really jumped out was, and I told him, I don't understand why you don't understand me. And this, of course, is a huge problem because it's not about being understood. It's about understanding others and working with that basis. That this is what is the basis of any form of social action, of benefiting others, whether it be on an individual scale or a group scale or a national scale. So Karmapa recommends listening carefully before developing a plan to act. And to go back to my discussion of plans, my definition of a plan is a well thought out fantasy, or sometimes a not so well thought out fantasy. And again, this is why we need to be willing to quickly change when new situations arise and the plan is not working. So love, concern, and affection are not optional. They are critical. They are important. That with love, solutions come much easier. And it's important to be able to love without needing a reason to love or without needing a reward. Very simply, this is unconditional love, love without conditions. And love is, of course, wanting another to be happy. So this is very important and very difficult. This is why there's so many problems in the world today, is people are unable, they have not learned how to love without needing a reward, without needing a reason. That if we base our social action on compassion and love, then it makes it sustainable in the long run. If it's not based on that, then it is not sustainable. He talks about material progress. And he points out that the Tibetans before the Chinese came were happy. And then the Chinese came. And since they were materially backwards, the Chinese looked at the Tibetans as being not very smart, dumb, and lots of other negative connotations. But as Karmapa says, they had what they needed and they were happy. And quote, it seems that in advanced societies, the less straightforward you are, the more clever and manipulative, the more you fit in and even rise to the top. So that's an important point that he makes. Instead of being happy and straightforward, being kind and so forth, that being clever, even manipulative, seems to be very highly valued in developed societies, as well as, of course, having money. It's amazing how, and he doesn't talk about this, but this is my observation, how now they are talking in Washington about various programs to authorize and to turn into law, and how often it is when it comes to social action that the problem with poor people is that they are undisciplined, that they're lazy, that there is something wrong with them, that the very fact that they're poor indicates that they are inferior. Karmapa says that if success is measured by how much you have compared to others, this is a recipe for failure. And that is because it condemns almost everyone to failure. And again, this is my comment here, that there are 3 billionaires that are building rockets so that they can get themselves into space. I don't have to mention them. So you get there, and then what? You want more and more and more. You don't go, oh, well, this is enough. Now I can sit back and I'm happy. It doesn't work that way. And the poor rest of us that can't have our own company to build a rocket to launch us into space. Well, if you have enough money, you can buy a seat next to one of these guys. The Karmapa says that we could define development in terms of how much we are able to increase bonds of friendship and closeness, and how important we place community and mutual affection, that these are terms that need to be on the top of the list of what's important in society. That if these are placed at the top, then it's easy to see what needs to be done or what needs to be changed. Then he talks about the values and how distorted they are. Quote, the most important things we need in order to support life have been turned into commodities. And he talks a little bit about healthcare. He says in many parts of the world, and perhaps even in this country, it's easier to get car care than to get health care. That healthcare should be a fundamental, basic right of all human beings. The same thing for nutritional food and shelter, that these things are not optional. They're not luxuries for people who can afford them. That looking at these as something that are commodities, this means that the welfare of others is dispensable. And he feels this is a failure to see that everybody wants to be happy, everyone wants to be free of suffering, and that happiness is a fundamental right of every human being. So here is another quote: equality and interdependence are both basic principles underlying our existence as human beings. It's interesting, the Karmapa was talking, he was giving teachings a couple of months ago and talking about the difference between the teachings of the Buddha and the Hindu society that he taught in. And one of the major differences was that the Buddha discarded the caste system, that he taught it to everybody. Everybody was considered equal. You did not have a caste of the Brahmin. You did not have the caste of the nobility. You did not have the untouchable and so forth, that everybody was equal. And so this is really what the Karmapa is talking about here, is that everybody is equal, whether they are wealthy or poor, regardless of what their occupation is or the color of their skin, education, and so forth. So he does talk more about the healthcare system. And needless to say, this may be a little political, but he definitely encourages universal health care because this is a universal need of all beings, and that it just does not make sense in terms of compassion and love, that some people get health care and other people don't get it, or some people can afford it and other people go bankrupt. I don't know if this is exactly true, but he said he had heard that in some places, when you go to the ER room, the first thing they ask you is about insurance, and then they start asking you about what's the problem. I do know this, that if you go into these smaller cities where I live out here, like Menominee, Eau Claire, Rice Lake, and so forth, the biggest buildings in town are hospitals and medical centers. So he encourages us to continue to contemplate the fact that all sentient beings, especially human beings, want to be happy. We have all of that in common, and that this is a solid basis to empathize with everyone else, to realize that there really is not a large gap between us and others. That when we experience physical pain, other people also experience physical pain just like us, and they want to avoid it just like us. So we have this fundamental equality. And no one has a greater or a lesser claim to happiness. So now, of course, it's easy to think or to have a counter argument. Well, equality means that everybody is the same, but no, everybody is different. But underneath all the differences, there is the equality. That is, we have a shared humanity. And so we all have differences from our life experiences, from the karma from our previous lives, and so on and so forth. We have differences in our bodies, in our intelligence, in how stable we are mentally, and how strong our kleshas are, and so forth. But while we can enjoy our differences, it's important not to, you might say, stress them to the point where they create differences or solidify the differences. And it's very easy to separate different people into different groups. In this country, for instance, after 9/11, a lot of people felt that all Muslims were terrorists and evil and needed to be, you might say, removed from the country because they were all threats. Or it's easy to think that all people that are African American are not as intelligent, don't deserve to be here, are problems, and have fear about them taking over, and so on and so forth. And I just making another comment here, that if you look at the way people protest the mask mandate, protest what they are teaching at school in certain states and in certain school districts, how violent they can get. And it seems like what I see on television is they're pretty much all white people. And imagine if that were Black people doing that. I think the response would be very, very different. This shows a little bit of the inequality that exists in our society. But anyway, diversity means that we can have different opinions. And even ourselves, we feel differently from day to day and even hour to hour. So it's important for us to maintain communication with people that are different from us, different culture, a different race, a different country. It's good to inquire about people that are different from us. And the Karmapa makes actually a couple of suggestions. He said, well, ask them about their country. Ask them about the beautiful places in their country, or what they like about the country they came from, or even favorite foods. Everybody likes to talk about food. That's pretty, not usually very controversial. And speaking of food, then I'm going to use an example here of food as diversity. we seem to think that the way we do things is the right way, and it's not interdependent. So I'm going to use the example of a good Italian spaghetti dinner. So first of all, you need wheat for the noodles. And so I looked this up, and wheat, they now think, was first cultivated in an area in the Eastern Mediterranean, Turkey, Syria, Lebanon. And it first appeared about 11,000 years ago. Noodles first appeared in China about 4,000 years ago. Now, tomatoes. What is a spaghetti without tomato sauce? Well, again, according to Wikipedia, they found tomatoes in Argentina that were 52,000 years old. It wasn't until Columbus and his other Spanish conquistadors brought tomatoes back could they have tomato sauce in Italy. And what about the plate that you eat the spaghetti on? Well, it's porcelain, and porcelain came from China roughly 1,200 years ago. So the point is interdependence and diversity. That technology does not come from one culture, one country, one continent. It comes from humanity. So Karmapa then compares diversity in humanity to the human body. And so he tells, he kind of begins the story by saying something like, "Pardon my earthiness." So he has this mythical story about all the different parts of the body decide to have a meeting. And they invite everybody except for the anus, because they figure the anus is just not worthy of being part of this meeting. Well, when the anus finds out about this, he goes on strike. And pretty soon, the other organs of the body are begging him to stop his strike. And so they invite him to a meeting. He stops his strike. And then at the meeting, he is voted the most important part of the body. The moral of the story is, of course, that even people that seem very unimportant and insignificant are very important. The people that do a cleaning in, let's say, hospitals, medical clinics, the people that clean restaurants, that clean the public toilets, the people that do very menial jobs in factories, very repetitive, boring, hard, tiring jobs that have low pay and perhaps no benefits, no union, and so forth. These people are very, very important. And these days, in a world economy, a lot of these people are working on the other side of the world under conditions that are incredibly harsh and severe. And so we need to realize these people are just as important as us and deserve the same human rights that we deserve. Quote, because we are all part of the same social body, it is in our own interest to assure that we can all function well together. And he finishes up by talking about immigration, which seems especially important today because there is so much immigration, people desperate to get to somewhere else than where they are because of war, famine, instability, gangs, and on and on and on. So he says that the very fact that there is immigration is an indication that we live in a global society, and that immigration can test the compassion of a country. And it certainly has done that in the last few years, both immigration coming into the United States, but also coming into Europe from Arabic countries and African countries due to the political instability and war. But it brings home the, in his words, the ethical implications of interdependence and equality. And to realize that the people that are immigrating are looking for a better life, and that they are suffering where they were. And so when they move into your country, when they move into your neighborhood, how do you react? If we look locally at, let's say, the Twin Cities, some Christian services, I think it's Lutheran Social Services and a Catholic charity, I'm not sure which one or which ones, were very instrumental in helping both the Vietnamese and the Tibetans resettle in the Twin Cities, and perhaps the Somalis as well. And it's also important to realize in terms of immigration that the United States is a country of immigrants. My grandfather and grandmother on my father's side, they came over from one from Norway, the other from Sweden. And my grandfather he was a butler. And on my mother's side, again, you go back a generation and again, more immigration. And it's this way for most of us. We don't have to go back very far. Very few people can say that I was here when 1776, when we fought the War of Independence. And immigrants fill jobs that Americans don't want to take. Now, just north of me, there is a turkey butchering plant. And it's the people that are actually doing the killing are Somalis. It's a town of less than 4,000 people, and there are 2 mosques in town. And they just went to hiring all Somalis to do it. Now, I don't recommend killing turkeys, But the fact is that before that, I would hear from people that worked there how hard the conditions were and how they were trying to organize, start a union, and no matter what they did, they always failed, and they really did not like working there. So immigration was the solution, and here the dairy farms now have a lot of Hispanic workers on them. If the immigrants were somehow removed, this country would be in economic collapse, in fact. So it's important to realize that immigration and immigrants play a very important role in the economy and producing food, for instance. And to put it very bluntly, this is what Karmapa says: whether or not we have a legal obligation, we have a clear and unequivocal human obligation to care for them, referring to immigrants, both legal and illegal. He doesn't say that there is one clear solution to the problem, but at least to think about this. To think about what can we do to help? What can we do to reduce the suffering of these people? And perhaps what can we do to help other people accept these immigrants? On that note, I'm going to open it up to questions and answers.